Give us free. Give us free. Give us free.
Your Honor, please instruct the defendant that he cannot disrupt these proceedings with such outbursts.
Give us free.
If we are to have any semblance of order in this
Give us
Mod Hotep, and welcome my conscious and unconscious family and peeps. This is the African Village Community Podcast, and I am truly your host of the show, JC, aka Afro Black, dropping nothing but the raw and uncut, without any fear, as I use my mic as a spear to chucka you with liberated truth. I am your host and African soldier in the struggle. My purpose and mission for this show is first to inform, enlighten, and engage. And you all know what I mean by engage. I want to engage with all those who claim they know the truth. All truth seekers and conscious family, I welcome you. This show is dedicated to all our ancient ancestors and to all those who have carried the mantle of truth. To every person with the ability to throw off the chains of comfortable habit and unwarranted assumption and move in a new, liberated direction that is guided by truth and observational evidence. No matter where that direction may lead you, my main objective and purpose here is freedom, mind, soul, and spirit. That being said, welcome to the African Village Community Podcast, and much love from our great universal African goddess and mother of all, living here and above. Ashe and Ashe.
In the house.
Aboriginal people, Aboriginal people, Aboriginal people, Aboriginal people, Aboriginal people, Aboriginal people, Aboriginal people. Aboriginal means the original inhabitant of a land from the earliest times. The ancient mound builders that built and designed the pyramids right here, not just by the Nile, contrary to popular belief in denial. Pyramids and huge hieroglyphics and pictographs on the ground are all mounds found around the Americas, North, Central, and South, even Venus and Mars. That is documented fact that emanates from my mouth. So who exactly were these aboriginals here, whose ancient evidence of residency is hesitantly mentioned in this hemisphere? Were they the stereotypical Native American so-called Red Indians? Well then, let's be clear, ask India, their tribe built their sincere. They'll tell ya, those mounds predate their origins. Our past was erased and replaced with lies. Our achievements and identity plagiarized. We got amnesia of who we are, but we go way back further than the seats in your car. Aboriginal people, 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 Aboriginal people.
Hey, this is JC, aka Afro Black, and I am here with you for another delicious Black Sunday to drop nothing but the raw and uncut here on the Black Village Community Podcast. And today is a continuation from last week's podcast subject matter, which is titled The Biggest Lies Ever Told to Black Americans, Part 2. Again, that is The Biggest Lies Ever Told to Black Americans, Part 2. Subtitle about our identity, DNA, and the African slave trade. Okay, you feel me? So today's subject matter is very important to me, just like it was last week. And this whole subject matter of Native American heritage and culture, which is a beautiful thing, is very important to me. And it should be important to every Black American to know who they are, to know your culture, to not be confused about your cultural heritage and your identity as a person, and where your heritage and your people come from. You feel me? And so it's important to me, and so we should reverberate on this today. If anybody want to join the podcast, it doesn't cost you a dime, just a bit of your conscious time. You can chime in at 855-445-9340. Again, that is 855-445-9340. You can also chime in at you can also chime in at 857-232-0155. Again, that's 857-232-0155. And don't forget the conference code to get through the conference door, which is 947595. And I got my queen here to reverberate with me today to talk about this subject matter, because it's important to her as well. So let me change my theme music so we can reverberate on a more laid back level. There we go. Yeah, I got some J-Bach here. You know, I got to get, as long as I talk about Black Native Americans, I got to play J-Bach, because J-Bach is talking about the Aboriginal people of America, if you're listening to the lyrics of what he's talking about. So my queen is here. Go ahead and chime in, queen.
Hello, my beautiful people.
And so this is an important subject matter. Let me say to all my conscious family out there that they might not be confused about, JC, aka Afro Black, that, as if I don't care about African culture and African history. What I care more about, more than anything, is truth. I care about truth. I care about the raw and uncut, and that's why my theme is the raw and uncut here on the Black Village Community Podcast. And so to find out about my true heritage and culture, was astonishing and true. It was really astonishing and a surprise, and to me personally, on a personal level. And so that doesn't take away from the fact that Africans and Native Americans had a lot in common. It doesn't take away from the fact that Black Native Americans, the Aboriginal Black Native Americans, and Africans shared things together and came together as a people and fought against the enemy on this very land, in this very country. So, but at the same time, it doesn't take away from the fact that this country was indigenous to a people, Black Native American people, you feel me, that had their own culture, their own identity, their own heritage, their own ceremonies, their own spirituality. It doesn't take away from that. These people didn't, as a result of Africans being shipped over here, or those that did come over here, the Native Americans didn't become African. Instead, the Africans got absorbed into the Native American community, and they became Native American. That's what Black people need to recognize and accept. As a result of the confusion and the delusion that's been perpetuated to us as a people, you have a lot of Black people that are confused on the identity subject of Black Native American heritage and culture, even though a lot of Black people, the majority of Black people, as I always say, if you go 5 generations plus into this country leading up to slavery, you are a Black Native American. But as a result of the propaganda of calling us African American, as a result of the delusion and the illusion that's been perpetuated to us through the educational system, through the media, through white people, through paperwork and documentation, placing it on job applications, African American on job applications. As a result of this, over a period of years, just like Adolf Hitler said in his book Mein Kampf, The Big Lie, if you say something over and over and over enough, it eventually becomes something that's accepted as truth. And that's what has happened to the black Native American here in America. And as a result, most black people don't care about their native heritage. They know their grandmother was Native. They know their grandfather was Native, or their great grandmother and grandfather were Native. But as a result, they don't care. They don't care. And as a result, they don't look into their past. They don't research their culture. They just accept what the stereotypical ordinary agenda promotes to them, that they're African American. And so they just embrace African culture and African heritage, ignoring the possibility that they're not African at all. And just because you have some African in you don't make you African, because the indigenous population of this country was black Native American. And that's what was on the plantations. In 1619, 1626, when the first Africans came here as slaves, they came to plantations that were already in process, that were already rolling, already making money for Europeans. And those plantations were ran by black Native American women, black Native American men, black Native American children. Not African. Africans came to a plantation full of people already laboring in the field, laboring on serving these white devil masters. Already, the women were being raped constantly by white masters. These were Native American black women. The men were being whipped and beat. The women were being whipped and beat. These were black Native American people that were being beat. So whenever you see a so-called African slave movie, that is not an African. That is a black Native American. And so I got information that I didn't get a chance last week to share that I want to share today. And one of the things that I want to share is an audio cast, and I wanted to talk about this white devil by the name of Walter Ashley Plecker, who helped diminish and destroy a lot of black Native American people who had documentation of who they were, a lot of black Native American people who had documentation on birth records, marriage license, and so forth. And this white devil, be the fact that he was the head of the Vital Statistics Department in Virginia, made it his mission to destroy all documentation and also manipulate documentation. As I said, Native Americans, black Native Americans, were called Negroes. They were called coloreds. They were called blacks. And as a result today, due to the brainwashing, most black people, when they hear the term black, the first thing they think is African. But that's just a color. It's not an ethnicity. Black is a color. It's not an ethnicity. Black is a color. It's not an ethnicity. You have many people with the skin color of dark brown to brown, and they are not African. The Fijian people of Fiji, the Aboriginal people of Australia, they're not African. They're indigenous to their landmass and locality. So to continue on this note, before I go any further, Queen, you want to conclude anything to what you just heard me say?
Oh, no, I think you got it on point.
I hope so. I'm doing my best here. I notice I see somebody here in the conference room before I continue on. Anybody here in the conference room have anything you might want to add to what I just said? I see you here from the 916.
Not at this time.
Okay, so I will continue on. And on that note, I have an audio cast that I really want to play. And before I continue on, this audio cast is going to explain a little bit about the history of how most black people's documentation, because a lot of black people, a lot of black Native Americans didn't have documentation, especially those that were enslaved on the plantations in the South, from Louisiana to Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi. Those plantations were filled with mostly black Native Americans. And so when the slaves were freed in 1865, through the so-called Emancipation Proclamation Act, they didn't give documentation to those slaves when they were freed. They didn't give them documentation that they were free, and they didn't give them documentation that validated their identification or their identity. They were just freed, and they were illiterate, and they were lost, and they didn't know who they were because they had been told for generations and generations by the white devil that they were black or colored or even African for that matter. They had lost their identity through the process of chattel slavery. So, let me continue on with this audio cast and we shall reverberate from here.
As we know, if in 1963, all of us, all our elders knew that they were Indian, the question is, why didn't they tell the generations after what their birthright was?
Of all the people buried here in historic Hollywood Cemetery, including presidents, generals, and statesmen, few have had the impact of Dr. Walter Plecker. His stormy legacy continues today.
Plecker was a menace to Virginia Indians over many years.
Well, Dr. Plecker was convinced that there was a need to purify the white race. He thought that he was preserving the Commonwealth of Virginia, that he was maintaining the United States of America, and most importantly to him, that he was protecting the white race.
For 34 years, starting in 1912, Dr. Plecker was the director of the state's Bureau of Vital Statistics, carefully compiling birth and death records. Anyone who had one drop of other than white blood was listed as colored. They were mongrels, in his view.
If you boys can read so good, how come you missed that sign on the door over there?
Oh, that sign on the door that we just... How come we didn't see that sign and say no colors allowed?
Virginia Indians particularly felt his wrath. Quote, like rats when you're not watching, he wrote, they've been sneaking in their birth certificates through their own midwives.
Whole groups of people who formerly were recognized among the tribes of Virginia simply disappeared from the records. They were no longer considered to be Native Americans or Indians as they were called. Their children were not recognized as members of the tribes, and they're living with that legacy right now.
Plecker and his many supporters believed not only that races should never intermarry, they shouldn't even mingle. Strict segregation would last for generations.
We blame Plecker, but he gave it to a very hungry audience. They ate it up.
Indeed, Plecker was seen as a heroic figure in an era when genetic engineering was becoming mainstream. The eugenics movement was white supremacy cloaked in science. Its supporters were many and influential, from leading academics at University of Virginia to wealthy industrialists. The Richmond Times-Dispatch editorialized in 1924 that racial intermingling would ruin the white man. Quote, once a drop of inferior blood gets in his veins, he descends lower and lower in the mongrel scale. That was the year the General Assembly passed the Racial Integrity Act, narrowly defining race and making it illegal for whites to marry anyone of any other race. Plecker wrote to the governors of the rest of the states, urging them to pass similar laws to save the white race. The Racial Integrity Act, which Plecker pushed, stood until 1967, when the appropriately named Loving case about an interracial couple led to a U.S. Supreme Court reversal. But the damage to Virginia's Indian tribes continues. There are more than 560 federally recognized Indian tribes in the country, but none of Virginia's tribes, the ones that helped the settlers survive, have that crucial recognition, because Walter Plecker did everything he could to destroy evidence of their existence.
There you go right there. There is, you heard that, Queen. And now he says that none of the tribes in Virginia have recognition due to Mr. Plecker's activity as...
destroying all their paper.
Yeah, destroying
validation.
Because he was the head of the vital statistics in the State Department. But what the speaker did not say is that, Walter Plecker had a lot of political connection. Especially if you think about it, for him to get in that position, being a white supremacist in the eugenics, he had to have connection. And for him to be destroying documentation and rewriting documentation, taking off a documentation Native American and putting Negro and colored on there, and destroying documentation to hide people's identity. But he had his political affiliation. When you do research on Mr. Plecker, he, the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, that was something that he pushed in Congress. This white devil had political clout, political connection, political power. And so that's what the speaker did not go into in depth about. He didn't go in depth about the fact because this man's ideology influenced not only Virginia, but it influenced North and South Carolina. It influenced all the other states from the South to the North and the West. Yeah. And so you had tribes all over the country not being able to be identified because you had other vital statistic people who work in an administrative office who was following suit of what Mr. Plecker was promoting through his white supremacist ideology. That's what the speaker don't talk about. I mean, it cracks me up. Whenever the white man tells the truth on the white man, he makes sure that white man becomes the fall guy. You know, he won't talk about anybody.
It's just him.
Yeah, it was just him. He was the only one doing this, you know. Just like they do the same thing with J. Edgar Hoover, you know. J. Edgar Hoover was Lucifer in the flesh. But you know what? He had demons and devils up under him doing his dirty work. He had demons and devils above him who knew what he was doing, and he was doing their work. So J. Edgar Hoover was not alone. Mr. Plecker was not alone. He was not a lone horse. He was not a lone ranger in his activities. He had white devils above him, below him, and beside him, political as well as administrative within the Vital Statistics Office who shared his ideology and did his dirty work. He was just a mastermind, that's all. Maybe. He might have been. I'm just assuming that. It might have been a mastermind behind him. He might have another white devil might have had his hand up his ass, and he was just a puppet. For all I know, to be raw and uncut about it. But this is the Black Village Community Podcast, and as I always say, you can join the podcast at 855-445-9340. You can also join in at 857-232-0155, and you need the conference key to get through the conference door at 947595. And so, you know, we shall continue this. But you know what? I want to read an article and that was motivated by Mr. Plecker, okay? Wasn't started by him, but you know what? He pushed the envelope on this level. Queen, if you can read the one drop rule, which is a very good, interesting article.
Let me go back to it. It says the one drop rule and racial identification by whites, blacks, and Native Americans. The original inhabitants of Virginia looked very different from the European immigrants who started arriving after Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. The Africans brought to Virginia in colonial times were easily distinguished from both Europeans and Native Americans, initially. However, once people of different races produced mixed offspring with a range of skin colors and facial features, the ability to distinguish one's quote-unquote race just from appearance became more challenging. Offspring of whites and blacks ended up being categorized based on the status of the mother. All children of female slaves inherited the status of slavery, no matter what the status of the father. Children of a free black mother gained status as a free person of color. Mixed-race children with a white mother faced discrimination, but were not consigned to slavery. Native Americans used different criteria and considered a child of Native American father or mother to be Indian, quote-unquote Indian. The existence of a category other than white or black caused great difficulty during the era of government-enforced segregation, when racial status defined one's right to eat in a restaurant, sit on a bus, or attend school. In 1924, Virginia officials sought to cut through the confusion and eliminate the potential for light-skinned blacks to pass as whites by categorizing any child with one drop of black ancestry as a black person.
All right, stop right there. And the only reason I want you to stop right there is because it's important for the conscious community to recognize, again, black is only a color. It's not an ethnicity.
It's not a racial definition.
It's not a racial definition. And so that is a word. I always say the white man is the master of manipulation. This language that we're speaking, which is the English language, which is a bastardized language, was created by the white devil. Okay, if you go look up how the English language was created, it was created from a multiple of other languages, French, Arab, and so forth, and Latin and so forth. But my point of saying this is that they manipulate by using that term black because, as I say, as a result of the continued brainwashing and propaganda of using the term African, and connecting black with African, people automatically think African when they hear black. But that's not true. No. You had Native Americans
that looked black. You had Native Americans that were brown, dark brown, to jet black brown. I'm saying jet black brown because really nobody's black.
No.
Nobody's black from the just by definition of the word. You have people who are very dark to the point that they look black, but they're not black. But my point being is that you had Native Americans in this country, like the Yuchi tribe, the Yamasee tribe, the Taloa tribe. Now, I've said these names before. As I research black Native American heritage in this country, I'm learning more and more about the Natchez people of Mississippi. They ranged from brown to dark brown to even light brown. Their hair texture ranged from wavy to straight to kinky curly. And these were full-blooded Native American Aboriginal people of America. The white man capitalized off of this and created a division within the Native American community. He capitalized off of this. He did his old favorite divisive tool that he's been using since the times that he came out of the cave, which is called divide and conquer. The white devil still uses that tool to this day to divide other countries and conquer other countries. The devil haven't changed. No. White devil has not changed his methodology. He might morph it. He might evolve it to another level, but the game remains the same. It's all about divide and conquer, so he can come in and take over. And he did that to the Native American population here, turning natives against one another, using natives to hunt down other natives, using the enemies of other natives, meaning maybe two tribes who didn't get along. He comes in, he festers that, and manipulates that situation, turning them from not liking each other to becoming enemies, and he used that same ideology, divide and conquer. He did this. And two of the tribes that I know he used a lot. The white devil used a lot. The Apache. He used people from the Cherokee tribe to conquer other native tribes, which I don't understand why I call them house Negro natives. Mm-hmm. I don't know why these house Negro natives allowed themselves to be used by the white devil, because the same white devil turned on them. So, from that perspective, go ahead, Queen. Continue to read, please.
Alrighty. Let's see. As modern society has come to appreciate diversity, it has also become more realistic to consider whether any family or community is of any pure race. After all, every human alive today can trace their ancestry back to migrants who moved out of Africa some 60,000 years, roughly 2,000 generations ago. There's a modern anthropology term, triracial isolate, for people whose racial origins are not clear and who may be a blend of white, black, and Indian ancestry. The Melungeon families in southwestern Virginia and Tennessee are often categorized by scientists as mixed community with genes from various races, though some members of those families strenuously argue that their true heritage is from Portuguese or Turkish sailors and Native Americans, and there is little or no intermixing with black ancestors.
Again, use that term black. That term black. Like I say, they would separate and segregate and create a wedge between the light-skinned Native American and the black-skinned or dark-skinned Native American. And they constantly did this. And they still do this to this day.
Trying to place, like, say, white and black as an ethnicity is ridiculous, because, there are dark-skinned people worldwide. It doesn't make them all the same race.
Well, look what the writer does. I mean, when you was reading above, the writer terms and says right here. It says, let me go right here. It says, after all, every human alive can trace their ancestry back to migrants who moved out of Africa from some 60,000 years ago. I mean, again, trying to make, and then when you read down, it turns around and uses the term black, saying separating Native Americans from black, as if there were no black or dark brown Native Americans.
Yeah.
And the very people that they enslaved, the very people who they fought the hardest, the very people who they tried to exterminate, were the black or dark skinned or dark brown Native American tribes. Now, a lot of light skinned or light brown Native Americans got caught up in the crossfire for a number of reasons. One reason is that a lot of the light brown Native American tribes allied themselves with their brothers because they knew that these Native Americans were their brothers. Okay. Yeah. Also, you had many tribes that didn't want to get in the middle of the crossfire as long as the white man didn't bother them. And that was stupidity and ignorance because the white man wanted their land just like he wanted the dark brown Native Americans' land. It was just a matter of time. He was going to come through your land too, which he did. I mean, today America inhabits practically every part of this country. What's left is the reservations and tourist parks.
It doesn't even belong to them. They're trying to claim something where people already lived and took over it to dominate it. Exactly.
So let me continue this. I have another audio cast I'm going to play. I've been telling everybody I was going to talk about the DNA thing. And so, I think I want to save that for last. I want to save that for last. I don't know. Whatever. But, I got
think it should be spoken about.
You think it should be spoken about, Queen?
I think it should be spoken about.
You think I should talk about the DNA thing?
People, I don't know.
You know what? Because my Queen said so, I'm going to do so. I'm going to play an audio cast. And this audio cast is, I found it very interesting because 60 Minutes got involved, showing that these DNA companies are ripping people off, okay? You got a lot of people running around. You got especially these black folks. When black people hold on to something that validate how they feel, and this is why I say a lot of black people don't know how to be people of truth. When you look for truth no matter what form it come in. You don't try to recreate that truth. You feel me? I mean, I considered myself African conscious at one time, and I still am African conscious, but I know my heritage and my culture and my identity is Native American. And so by that, I have to also pay attention, focus, and be conscious of my identity and my cultural heritage. I'm not going to, embrace African culture when I am not African. You feel me? I'll acknowledge African culture. I love African culture, but I'm not going to call myself a Zimbabwean or a Nigerian or a Ghanaian or a Ashantian, and that's not who I am. I'm not from the continent of Africa. My people were right here, indigenous to America, and that's who I am. I am a black Native American. So on that note, I'm going to play an audio cast where 60 Minutes exposed these white devils and their DNA corporations for what they are, a bunch of lying, corporate, greedy devils. So we shall continue after this.
To Vi Higginson, the prospect of tracing even a tiny fraction of her ancestry back to Africa was enthralling. 60 Minutes sent her DNA to African ancestry, as well as to several other genetic genealogy companies, to see what they could tell us about Vi's maternal lineage.
I'm sitting on the edge of my seat.
Kittle's company sent Vi what they call a certificate of ancestry.
Oh my God.
It says that you share maternal genetic ancestry with people from the Mendi tribe in Sierra Leone. Do you know anything about Sierra Leone or the Mendi people?
No.
Nothing.
People have been waiting a lifetime for something like this. Now, this is just a tiny bit of information now.
But they take it as huge.
Right, because it's cracking open the door that was closed for centuries.
There's a place in Africa you could say that I'm from.
A tribe?
I am thrilled. It puts a name, a place, a location, a people. It opens up such possibilities.
But the problem is, Sierra Leone wasn't the only answer Vi got. A company called Relative Genetics found a match to a single person in the Wobi tribe in the Ivory Coast.
Different?
Different.
Now, I got all excited about that, and this is different. Now, how could that happen?
Then a third company, Trace Genetics. Your particular sequence matches sequences reported among multiple Mendenka individuals in Senegal.
What's up with this?
And Family Tree DNA, the company that linked Vi with Marion in the first place, came up with a whole list of matches. This goes on and on.
My goodness.
So what do we know about Vi's ancestry? The DNA does indicate that she has distant relatives in the Mende tribe, but she also has relatives in all those other tribes. so no one can say for sure where Vi's maternal ancestor actually came from. When I handed Vi the certificate, she got extremely emotional about it. She wept, and it meant so very much.
People want to believe.
They want to believe they've gotten an answer.
And it's not fair of us to let them believe that we're giving them certain answers, because scientifically, we just can't.
Hank Greeley is concerned that the science isn't really there yet for you to be giving them the name of a tribe.
I think for most companies, I would be concerned too.
But what about your own company?
We have
He didn't exclude you. He included you.
But we have the largest set of sequences from Africa. And so with that, we're able to provide some level of probability in terms of frequency.
But he would say that even though you have the largest database, it's still small on the scope of things.
As I said, I share those concerns.
About yourself.
Our DNA.
And that's the rub. This business of genetic genealogy is fraught with limitations. For one thing, it can only provide information about a tiny fraction of our ancestry. Because we get half our DNA from our mothers and half from our fathers, almost all of our DNA gets shuffled and remixed every generation, making it impossible to trace what comes from whom. There are just 2 bits of DNA that remain pure: the Y chromosome, which passes directly from father to son, and something called mitochondrial DNA, which passes unchanged from mother to child. Hank Greeley, a law professor at Stanford University, has studied this new field. He worries that people don't realize just how many ancestors they actually have.
8 generations ago, both you and I had 256 great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents.
Wait, you're saying that if you go back 8 generations, we have 256 great-great-great-grandparents?
Yes, it doubles every generation. So you've got 2 parents, you have 4 grandparents, you have 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, and it adds up fast. It adds up so fast, in fact, that if you go back 20 generations, you've got over 1 million grandparents.
1,048,576 to be exact. And in each generation, DNA testing can provide information about only 2 of them.
So you could be Peruvian on your mother's 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 side, Japanese on your father's 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 side, Swedish on everything else.
And you'll never know.
And you'll never know the Swedish from the Y chromosome or the mitochondrial DNA.
Now, you've looked at several of these companies that are doing these tests.
Yes.
Do you think that they explain what you just explained to us?
No. I don't think any of them does as good a job of pointing out the limitations. But, businesses often don't go around telling you how weak their product is.
We don't oversell. We just say, look, we provide a service. If you're interested in exploring a tiny bit of your DNA and trace its ancestry, we can do that.
When you say it's a tiny little amount...
It's less than 0.1%.
When you say it's a tiny little amount...
It's less than 0.1%.
That's pretty teeny.
Yeah, but for people who know nothing about any of them, I think it's very important.
There you go. 60 Minutes got involved in that. What do you have to say about what we just heard?
Less than 0.1% of all that's it's all that tested. It's all that's tested. So, they can't tell you who you genetically are except for who your parents are, who your grandparents are, who your aunties and uncles and cousins are. That's all a DNA test is good for.
Well, yeah, exactly.
It's to connect you to actual family.
Well, exactly.
So our history of heritage of who we are is an oral tradition. It has nothing to do with the so-called government paperwork to prove who we are.
There you go. Tell it. That's exactly what it is. And what bothers me about this the most, it also bothers other Native Americans as well. I've spoken to some, I've spoken to some, and I've also heard some audio casts that were put on by some chiefs of some tribes, like the brother who, what's his name? His name is Langley, Chief Langley of the Yuchi tribe, who talks about this. And I've also read an article that I have that talks about this as well. Why the government is not paying attention to the way the tribes determine a person's cultural identity and connection to the tribe. They totally ignore this. You got these white devils are the ones that are dictating what makes a person who they are, telling you who you are. But you know what? I don't see them doing this to white people. I don't see them telling white people who they are. When a white person...
Like when we were reading the one-drop rule, I mean, it goes on to explain exactly that they use it to exclude black folks from their heritage, but include themselves into that same heritage.
Exactly. If you got one drop of what they call black blood, what they mean black blood? What I mean, they don't
that doesn't even make any sense.
No, it doesn't, because they don't say one drop of African blood. They don't. They're not specifying specifics, and the reason why is because they know, these white devils know that the majority of the black populace. I'm talking about not people who've immigrated here from Africa. I'm not talking about people who've immigrated from the islands. I'm talking about people who have 5+ generation back in this country that leads to slavery. They know who we are. They know that we are the descendants and the children of the Aboriginal people of America, black Native Americans. And they know this. And they don't want black folks knowing this, though. They don't want black folks waking up to this, because then we can lay claim to this country as we should. This is our country. This is our land. They are the aliens. They're the aliens. Yeah. They're the foreigners. Doesn't matter that their children have been here generation and generation. Their children are the children of foreigners. Bottom line. You know, like I always say, white folks act like they're sympathetic to so many causes, but the causes that they should be sympathetic to. And you know what?
That whole one-drop theory needs to be eliminated out of the governmental system.
Exactly.
The removing of classifying what you are should be removed off of paperwork. Because they should not be telling us what nationality we are, because that's an unimportant issue.
And you know what? I wanted to mention how the government is talking about getting involved with this. That information I thought I had right here. It talks about the government getting involved in dealing with these genetic testing companies who are lying to people and manipulating people's mindset about who they think they are. But on that note, I would like to play an audio cast of Chief Langley of the Yuchi tribe and what he has to say about DNA. What he has to say about DNA testing. I believe this is the audio cast right here. So let me play this audio cast and we shall continue.
Today is Thursday, January 23rd, 2014, African American and African Radio. We're joined by Chief Langley from the Yuchi tribe. Chief, earlier we talked about the Racial Integrity Act. Could you talk to the audience about what the Racial Integrity Act is and how it applies to us?
The Racial Integrity Act of 1924, I have some friends that are from Virginia. Oh, they can explain that more beautifully than I can because they lived it. But this is what I'm going to tell you is according to what I've read, I've discussed with my colleagues, Dr. Plecker decided to reclassify people in Virginia who was native to say that there are no more Indians in the state of Virginia. So he classified them as colored or Negro and wrote them out of existence. Now, the Racial Integrity Act of 1924 brings about and expresses the one-drop blood rule. You got to understand this. That's why your mother could be native or your father could be native and one parent's black, you're black. You can have your great-great-great-great-grandfather an African and everybody else was 6th generation up is native, which you done married a complete African out in that many generations, you are still considered black. But remember, black is a color, not a race. White, on the other hand, native and white will equal native or white. Oklahoma passed a law, Supreme Court law, many, many years ago, only about 100 years ago, that all Indians are white. The law benefited them. The Dawes Roll benefited them. And you have to be very careful with the Dawes Roll. Because those names on the Dawes Roll are common and may not apply to you. There are too many groups going around pushing this, and people are getting played. And I'm telling you from my own experience, the Dawes does not apply to you unless you know your family was in Oklahoma and they came back. You really don't need it. You really don't. What you need to do is understand your history. There are tribes out there that are in existence that don't even use the Dawes Roll because it don't apply to them. What you need to understand is the racial reclassification codes in your colonial state that has reclassified you. Get yourself in the mood of start studying Native American law within that state and say, hey, no, my people were reclassified. This is who I am, and I can prove it. And when you go back and look at the congressional law and look at the census, you'll understand it. Most folks go online and deal with Ancestry.com because the federal census every 10 years. I like to use something when I assist people called Family Search, because Family Search deals with a 5-year census and a 2-year census. And those 5-year census is state. 2-year census is your counties. People moving in and out. You will find your people a lot better from what I have seen with Family Search. Because it's going to deal with short timelines and going to deal with the little local courthouses, not the federal. A lot can happen in 10 years. People move around a lot. People may have changed their names. And be careful with that on the census, too. Because your ancestors' name might be spelled one way, and you're looking at it a different way, or the last name might be first, and the first name is last. They're the same people. I have seen this hundreds of times. Hundreds of times. So you can't overlook that. Your grandparents, your ancestors have given you a roadmap. When they say Indian, then folks say, I don't want to use the word Indian, that is indigenous. I'm going to take it with me all the way to the bank. Because that's how I identify my people. My people had to convert back from colored to Negro to back to Yuchi. In today's time, those that are not tribal, they have to convert back from African American to colored to Negro to Yuchi. Because that's who we are.
There you go. From a chief, from Brother Chief Langley of the Yuchi tribe. You feel me? Dropping it on you. And you notice you hear he mentioned the white devil, Walter Ashby Plecker, who was changing and rearranging. And, you know, I mean, the man was a self-proclaimed eugenics white supremacist. And yet he had an important position where he had access to people's birth records and marriage certificates and licenses and so forth, and was changing and rearranging and destroying and relabeling this white devil. You heard it, Queen.
Yep.
Yeah. So let me go on over here to the conference room and see if anybody got anything to say or add. I'm just opening up the conference room, and if anybody got anything they might want to add or say to what they've heard so far. No.
I think that.
Well, let's take this one at a time. Go ahead, Brother Currington from 916-633. Go ahead, bro.
Yeah, the information that you got out there is good, and it is definitely showing how this white man has played a trick on us that, you know, is devastating. Because he got us thinking one way when it's really another.
That's true. That is very true. That's how he divides and conquers.
Yeah. But we got to be willing to, as a people, of not accepting, listening, and hearing what has been done, if no more than just to know.
Exactly.
You know, because really, once you get it into your psyche that this is actually what was really done, then you're gonna, and that's probably why a lot of people choose not to listen, because they don't want to think.
Well, also, my wife said it before, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again. We have become complacent. I mean, that's a part of the mental slavery. I mean, they didn't free black folks just because they wanted to bring the Union together. These white devils decided to free black folks because they were also comfortable enough that they knew that they had changed, rearranged, and erased cultural identity from the black natives on the plantation. They knew they did this. I mean, they did this through chattel slavery, which was the process of taking away your name, your religious practices, your identity, your language. They did that on the plantation. And then they also did it when, over 100 years later, by, you know, when it got to around 1619 and 1626, and they say, okay, now let's bring some Africans over here. Now we can continue to dilute them. Now, of course, they did it for profit. They did it because the Africans knew cotton, knew how to grow cotton, knew how to pick cotton, okay? But they also did it to dilute and to continue the delusion over a people who were already confused and lost because everything was taken from them. Not only their land, but their identity. And to bring in Africans and to breed those Africans with Native American women on the plantation just deepened the delusion of the mind of the people to not know who they are and who they were. But you know what? As I told, by playing roots, they know what they're doing by playing roots. They're continuing the cycle of the delusion that they want black folks to be confused and lost. Roots is not based on anybody's family. Alex Haley did base Roots on his family. He plagiarized when he wrote Roots. He was sued for over $500,000 and feel secure here in America that they ain't losing nothing. They knew they were brought across the waters. So why wouldn't an African make sure that his children's children know who he is? So my question that I raised that black people need to pay attention to is, how come we have a strong history, a strong oral tradition of knowing that we have Native American in our family, but most black folks have no oral tradition of African identity? You ask your average black person, do you know anybody in your family from Africa? They're going to tell you no. You ask that same black person, do you have any Native American in your family? Oh yeah, my auntie, my grandma, my grandfather, my great-grand. They're going to tell you yes. That's the oral tradition that we need to follow, and it's like a piece of evidence that we need to trace. And most black people don't. They're complacent. They're comfortable, just like black folks in the church. They're brainwashed comfortable. So, anybody got anything to say to that there? Okay, look like nobody got nothing to say to that there. So, on that note, before our show, record my stuff and upload it. Messing with me up off in here. So I got another audio cast I want to play before we're off the air. I got one more audio cast I want to throw in here by Chief Langley. Let me play that, and we shall end the show on this note here.
I'm wondering, Chief, I'm getting a lot of emails and I'm getting a lot of inquiries about this DNA. You know, everybody's paying for these DNA tests. Are those DNA tests valid? And if they are, what do they tell us?
I am a computer scientist by degree. I am also an engineer. I deal with black and white, and I deal with common sense. They have never really been scientific proven unless you've taken a DNA test for paternity. So if you want to take a DNA test and go dig up the oldest ancestor you have in your church or your family cemetery, by all means go take a DNA test, because you're doing it with your relatives. How is it possible for Native people who converted to Christianity or took European names, where are these surnames based upon? Because it's European. I have a question. I have a serious problem with it. Oh, sure, you'll be genetic cousins, but you're not blood cousins. Yes, they improvement. How is DNA going to tell me who my relative was 10,000 years ago? It's not a scientific fact. It's a guess, like Einstein's theory of relativity. It's never been proven. They take it to be fact. But you have people out there that live and die by DNA. I don't believe in it. I don't need it. I will never take one. Why should I take one if I can go back to 1725? Documentation on my family. I can go back another 60 years with oral stories. I'm not going to take one. I think it's laziness when people get into it. And what people really need to do, your ancestors, your great-grandma or your great-aunt or great-grandpa left you something. And when he said, my mother was an Indian, my daddy was an Indian, so what does make you think that you're not an Indian? The blood just died out and disappeared with you? This is how colonial law has come into play. Everyone needs to go research the census of 1930. Take my word for it. Go read it.
Well, what will we find in the census of 1930?
Race classification that is biased. And what I mean by that, if your mother was an Indian and your father was black, you were black. If your mother was an Indian and your father was black, you were black.
There you go. Again, black is not an ethnicity. And Brother Chief Langley have said that before, and I've heard him say it and as well. Queen, you heard what the brother had to say.
Yeah.
You know, these white devils playing with our identity, keeping us lost. Because, for their benefit. For their benefit. It's us who, we know what we've come too far though in this country today. We got too many intelligent black folks. The sad thing about it is that a lot of intelligent, educated black people are not independently intelligent and educated. They're more or less educated puppets. What would you say to that?
Yeah, it's sad, but, it goes along the same lines of being complacent and not using the same verifications we've used throughout our lives is who we are by definition, who our parents are, who our grandparents are, who they told us they were.
Yeah. That's real.
And reclassifying someone as black is like telling white people they white. They'll tell you, no, I'm this, I'm that, I ain't white. Because they see white as an American idea.
That's true. Again, this is JC AKR for Black here with you at the Black Village Community Podcast. If you had any issues in my show with any connections or funny things sounding funny, my show has been pinged. I don't know, probably by some white devils out there trying to interfere with my podcast show by, creating static, you feel me? But I'm back, I'm black. I will be here, as always, every Sunday from 3 to 4 Pacific Standard Time, dropping nothing but the raw and uncut here. And, I got some more information that I really would love to share. I don't know if I want to read, I think I'm going to read it anyway. I'm going to read it. I know I'm all supposed to be off the air, but I'm going to read this. This is titled, Defining Traditional American Indian Identity through the come on, Queen. You said
I have no idea reading.
This Indian tribe, I cannot pronounce their name properly, and I don't want to pronounce it improperly. If you want to pull it up, it's under Defining Traditional American Indian Identity, and I got the page numbers there that I want to check out. I'm going to start with page 6, but let me read this. And my queen is pulling it up. I didn't have a chance to let her know ahead of time, but I want to read this because he talks about defining the identity of Native American people. So let me start this off right here. She can catch up. There are two primary reasons for this study. First, to provide insight into the Indian identity issue for non-Indians, or what it means to be traditional, its relevance, and who Indian people are from cultural perspective. Second, to start the discussion within the tribal nations about utilizing their traditional culture in governance and membership issues. Most tribal nations are using oppressive means to determine membership. You heard what the writer said? Now let me get this straight. Let me say, so because somebody might want to know what I'm reading. So let me, Queen, did you pull that up?
I don't know what page.
Just go to the first part and read the title of this, because you good at pronouncing things.
Ready. It says defining traditional American Indian identity through the Anishinaabe cultural perspective.
The Anishinaabe cultural perspective by Joshua Edward Madre. Is that how you pronounce his last name?
I would guess.
From Minnesota State University. He's a Maquito, I guess, Maquito Indian. I'm not sure, but he's an Anisha. Okay, let me leave that alone. But you said better than I did. But let me go back down the page. Anishinaabe tribe. Okay, let me go back to that. I want to finish reading this right quick. Okay, most tribal nations are using oppressive means to determine membership, and namely blood quantum. This is adding to the destruction of their nation, culture, and individual Indian people. It is encouraging cultural assimilation into a larger society, which will lead to their demise. Traditional culture brings healing, understanding, and provides a roadmap for modern times through a cultural values and perspectives. It is not the author's plan to create a situation where there are right and wrong perspectives or answers. The traditional approach is but one solution. The traditional approach. Because race is not an adequate indicator of culture. Identity is something that should be addressed rather than assumed. So basically, a lot of these tribes today, which are headed by white folks who call themselves native or calling themselves Indian because they have, 1/16 of Indian blood in them or whatever. And they have perpetuated racism within the Native American community. Basically, the light-skinned Native American is really betwixt himself, and he's confused, and he's operating from a white supremacist perspective rather than a traditional Native American cultural perspective. And this is the reason why the writer says most tribal nations are using oppressive means to determine membership, namely blood quantum. So people, we need to wake up. Mm-hmm. We really need to wake up. Okay, and there was another article I wanted to read, which is titled Documentary Genocide, Families' Surnames on Racial Hit List. Did you see that, Queen?
I have that.
Please read that before we go.
Let's see. By Peter Hardin from the Times-Dispatch Washington correspondent, Sunday, March 5th, 2000. Long before the Indian woman gave birth to a baby boy, Virginia branded him with a race other than his own. The young Monacan Indian mother delivered her son at Lynchburg General Hospital in 1971. Proud of her Indian heritage, the woman was dismayed when hospital officials designated him as black on his birth certificate. They threatened to bar his discharge unless she acquiesced. The original orders came from Richmond generations ago. Virginia's former longtime registrar of the Bureau of Vital Statistics, Dr. Walter Ashby Plecker, believed there were no real native-born Indians in Virginia, and anybody claiming to be Indian had a mix of black blood. And aggressively policing the color line, he classified pseudo-Indians as black and even issued a 1943 hit list of surnames belonging to mongrel or mixed bloodlines, suspected of having Negro ancestry, who must not be allowed to pass as Indian or white.
Okay, quick. Before you go any further, you mix up. He said families suspected of having Negro ancestry who must not be allowed to pass as Indian or must pass or white. So this is proof right here. This is proof. This article is proof, and even the history of Walter Ashby Plecker is proof that there were black Indians in this country, because the light-skinned Indian did not ever have a problem in this area. The light-skinned Indian with straight jet black hair and light skin was automatically assumed as Indian. But anybody that was darker than light skin, anybody that was brown or dark brown, was labeled Negro or black on their birth certificate. And Walter Ashby was a part of that agenda. My birth certificate calls my parents Negro, both my parents Negro. Not African, but Negro. Why would they put Negro on your birth certificate if you're African?
Why wouldn't they just put African?
Exactly. They had no problem putting African on anything, if you knew you were African. So this white devil knew what he was doing. But anybody that was Native American was labeled Negro and colored and black. Go ahead and continue, Queen.
With hateful language, he denounced their tactics. Like rats, when you are not watching, they have been sneaking in their birth certificates through their own midwives, giving either Indian or white racial classification, Plecker wrote. 28 years later, the Monacan mother's surname still was on Plecker's list. She argued forcefully with hospital officials. She lost. Today, the woman's eyes reveal her lingering pain. She consulted with civil rights lawyers and eventually won a correction on her son's birth certificate. I don't think the prejudice will ever stop, said the woman, who agreed to talk to a reporter only on the condition of anonymity. She waged a personal battle in modern times against the bitter legacy of Plecker, who ran the Bureau from 1912 to 1946. A racial supremacist, Plecker and his influential allies helped shape one of the darkest chapters of Virginia's history. It was the epic of Virginia's sponsored racism. A physician born just before the Civil War, Plecker embraced the now discredited eugenics movement as a scientific rationale for preserving Caucasian racial purity. He saw only two races, Caucasian and non-Caucasian, and staunchly opposed their amalgamation.
After helping win passage in 1924 of a strict race classification and miscegenation, I'm having a hard time with words as well. Miscegenation.
Miscegenation.
Go ahead, Queen.
It's a stupid word. Log recalled the Racial Integrity Act. Plecker engaged in a zealous campaign to prevent what he considered destruction of the white or higher civilization. When he perceived Indians as threats to enforcing the color line, he used the tools of his office to endeavor to crush them and deny their existence. Many Western tribes experienced government neglect during the 20th century, but the Virginian story was different. The Indians were consciously targeted for mistreatment. Plecker changed racial labels on vital records to classify Indians as quote-unquote colored, investigated the pedigrees of racial quote-unquote suspect citizens, and provided information to block or annul interracial marriages with whites. He testified against Indians who challenged the law. Virginians Indians refused to die out, although untold numbers moved away or assumed a low profile. Now, 8 surviving tribes recognized by Virginia in the 1980s are preparing to seek sovereign status from the U.S. government through the Act of Congress. About 3,000 of the 15,000 Indians counted in Virginia in the 1990 census were indigenous to the state, experts say. As they bid for federal recognition, more Indian leaders are talking openly about the injustice of Plecker's era. They gave a copy of his 1943 hit list to Virginia members of Congress along with other data in support of their bid. Modern scholars have studied Plecker and the racial integrity era. Their findings contributed to this article, yet he's not widely known today. It is an untold story, said Oliver Perry, chief emeritus of the Nanasamond tribe. It is not that we're trying to dig him up and re-enter him again, said Gene Atkins, assistant chief of the Eastern Chickahominy tribe. We want people to know that he did damage the Indian population here in the state. And it's taken us years, even up to now, to try to get out from under what he did. It's a sad situation, really sad.
Okay. That's I think that's enough information on the White Devil, Walter Ashby. He's an ashy white man plecker. Because my show is really over, but I just had to get that in. But I want everybody to know that this article on Mr. Plecker and the audio cast that I played on about the history of that White Devil, who was the head of the vital statistics in the State Department in Virginia, was only an example of what happened throughout this country. Mr. Plecker, as if you paid attention to the article, had allies, and he pushed for a racial integrity act to be throughout the United States. Now, so my point being is that, Virginia has always been an example to the other states on what they did to slaves and what they did to the what they considered the minority populace, when in reality, these white devils are the minority. So, on that note, we will be back and we will be black. And so, I must end my podcast, sadly to say. So before I go, let me see if anybody in the conference room has anything to say or add to what they've heard so far. No, nobody got nothing to say. Well, I hope you learned something, though. Queen, you got anything you want to say? Any last words before we go, Queen?
And just to stay united, to stay strong, and to accept who you are and not who somebody tells you are.
Sounds good to me. I totally agree. Sounds good to me. Anybody, nephew from 619, you got any last words you want to say before we go, nephew? Well, I guess not. Yep.
I just like the information you gave about it.
Okay. Well, I'm glad everybody. I hope everybody out there in the conscious community enjoyed this information that I'm doing my best to disseminate to the conscious community. And I might do a part 3. I got more information I didn't get a chance to share. An article that I read before that talked about DNA. I really wanted to read. I might just read a little excerpt right here, where it says, DNA is often our only path to unravel the truth, as Indian ancestry was hidden in the 1800s and early 1900s due to laws that labeled anyone with Indian heritage as a person of color, meaning black, or more accurately stated, non-white. Along with that label came the discriminatory practices of that time. I'm just going to leave it like that, because my queen over here say, hey, it's over, let's get off the air. So I gotta go. So on that note, I will be back. I will be black, dropping nothing but the raw uncut every Sunday from 3 to 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time here on the Black Village Community Podcast. I enjoyed my time. I hope everybody else learned something and enjoyed their time here as well. You can always chime in. It don't cost you a dime, just a bit of your conscious time. Please chime in and join me at the conference table of truth at 855-445-9340, 857-232-0155, and conference key 947595. On that note, I gotta go. And as I always say, may the great mother bring us together in the love of her truth. And as I always say, I love chicken. So love, peace, and chicken grease. I gotta go.
Yeah.